Have you ever noticed that you can understand English when you're watching a video, but when someone speaks to you in real life, you suddenly don't know what to say? You know the vocabulary, you understand the grammar, you have studied English for months or even years, but when it's time to have a real conversation, you hesitate. You think about every word before you say it. You worry about making mistakes, and sometimes you simply stay quiet. But here's something you need to understand. Good communication is not about speaking perfect English. It is about being able to connect with people. You don't need complicated vocabulary. You don't need long sentences. You need to know how to start a conversation, how to ask questions, how to respond naturally, and how to keep the conversation going. Today, you're going to learn these skills through a realistic story. Listen carefully to the conversations. Notice the expressions. Pay attention to how the speakers respond to each other. And if you hear a useful sentence, pause the video and repeat it aloud. Don't just listen. Listen, understand, repeat, and speak. Now let's begin. A simple conversation that changed everything. It was a beautiful Monday morning. James woke up early, got ready for work, and left his apartment. He had recently moved to a new city. Everything was still unfamiliar. The streets were new. The people were new. Even his workplace was new. James could understand English quite well, but he wasn't confident when speaking. He often knew what he wanted to say, but he was afraid of saying it incorrectly. That morning, he decided to challenge himself. He made a simple promise. Today, I'm going to speak English whenever I get the opportunity. He walked into a small coffee shop near his office. The barista smiled and said, "Good morning. What can I get for you?" James smiled. "Good morning. I'd like a medium coffee, please." "Sure. Would you like milk or sugar?" "Just a little milk, please. Anything else?" "No, that's all. Thank you." The barista smiled. "You're welcome. Have a great day." James took his coffee and sat near the window. It was a very short conversation. But for James, it was important. He had spoken. He hadn't worried about perfect grammar. He simply communicated. A few minutes later, a young man entered the cafe and sat at the table next to him. The man looked at James and smiled. James decided to practice his English again. He said, "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" The man replied, "No, it is free." "Thanks." James sat down. After a moment, he asked, "Do you come here often?" The man smiled. "Yes, almost every morning." "I work nearby." "Oh, really? What do you do?" "I work for a technology company." "That sounds interesting. What kind of work do you do?" "I'm a software designer." "Wow, that sounds challenging." "It can be, but I enjoy it." James smiled. "I'm still new to this area. Do you know any good places to eat around here?" The man immediately started recommending several restaurants. James listened carefully. He asked questions. He responded. He showed interest. And slowly, the conversation became easier. After about 10 minutes, James realized something. He had just had a conversation with a complete stranger, and he had survived. More importantly, he had enjoyed it. The secret of a good conversation. As James walked to work, he thought about the conversation. He realized that he had not used difficult English. He had simply followed a basic pattern. He asked a question. He listened to the answer. Then he asked another question based on that answer. That is one of the most important skills in communication. You don't need to prepare an entire conversation in advance. Instead, listen to what the other person says and use their answer to continue the conversation. For example, if someone says, "I'm from Italy," you can ask, "Oh, really? Which part of Italy are you from?" If they say, "I work in a hospital," you can ask, "That sounds interesting. What do you do there?" If they say, "I love traveling," you can ask, "What's the best place you've ever visited?" One answer can lead to another question. One question can lead to another topic, and suddenly you're having a natural conversation. A conversation at work. When James arrived at his office, he met his new colleague, Sarah. She smiled and said, "Good morning, James. How are you?" "I'm doing well, thank you. How about you?" "I'm good." Did you have a nice weekend? Yes, I did. I explored the city a little. Oh, nice. Did you find any interesting places? Yes, I found a really nice park near my apartment. That sounds lovely. Do you live nearby? Yes, I do. I moved here about 2 months ago. Oh, so you're still getting used to the area? Exactly. Sarah smiled. Well, if you ever need recommendations, just let me know. That's very kind of you. I appreciate it. This conversation was simple, but it sounded natural because James didn't give short answers. Instead of saying, yes, he said, yes, I did. I explored the city a little. Instead of saying, no, he added information. This is an important speaking technique. Don't just answer the question, add something to your answer. If someone asks, do you like traveling? Don't simply say, yes. Try saying, yes, I really enjoy traveling. I especially like visiting places where I can experience a different culture. Now the other person has something to respond to. That is how conversations grow. A conversation over lunch. At lunchtime, James went to a restaurant with Sarah. The waiter came to their table. Good afternoon. Are you ready to order? Sarah said, yes, I think so. Then she looked at James. What are you having? I'm not sure yet. Everything looks good. The waiter smiled. Can I recommend today's special? Yes, please. What is it? It's grilled chicken with vegetables and rice. That sounds good. I'll have that, Sarah said. I'll have the same, please. The waiter smiled. Excellent choice. After the waiter left, Sarah asked James, so how are you finding your new job? James replied, I'm enjoying it so far. There's a lot to learn, but everyone has been very helpful. That's good to hear. What about you? How long have you been working here? I've been here for almost 3 years. Wow, that's a long time. Yes, I started as an assistant and gradually moved into my current position. That's impressive. Thank you. Notice how natural this conversation sounds. There is no complicated vocabulary. There are no long speeches. It is simply a series of questions, answers, reactions, and follow-up questions. That is real communication. How to show interest. If you want people to enjoy talking to you, learn how to show interest. You can use expressions such as, really? That's interesting. I didn't know that. That sounds exciting. That must have been difficult. That's great to hear. Tell me more about it. What happened next? How did you feel about that? These expressions are simple, but they make conversations much more natural. Imagine someone tells you, I recently started learning photography. Instead of saying, okay, you can say, really? That's interesting. What kind of photography do you enjoy? Now the person has an opportunity to talk. And when people feel that you are genuinely interested in what they are saying, they usually feel more comfortable around you. Talking to someone new? Later that afternoon, James attended a small meeting. Before the meeting started, he noticed another person standing alone. James decided to introduce himself. Hi, I'm James. I don't think we've met before. The man smiled. Hi, I'm Daniel. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too. Is this your first time attending one of these meetings? Yes, it is. Same here. How did you hear about it? A friend recommended it to me. Oh, that's nice. What do you do? I work in finance. Interesting. Do you enjoy your work? Yes, most of the time. It can be stressful, but I like the challenge. James nodded. I understand that. I think every job has its difficult days. Daniel smiled. That's true. The conversation continued. Neither person was trying to impress the other. They were simply talking. And that is another important lesson. A conversation is not a performance. You don't have to impress people. You don't have to sound perfect. You simply have to communicate. When you don't understand. But what happens when someone speaks too quickly? James experienced this later that evening. Someone asked him a question, but he didn't understand the last part. For a moment, he felt nervous. Then he remembered his goal. He smiled and said, Sorry, could you say that again? The person repeated the question. James still wasn't completely sure. So he said, Could you explain what you mean? The person explained it in a different way. This time, James understood. He replied, "Oh, I see. In that case, I think." And the conversation continued. This is important. Never pretend to understand when you don't. Instead, use simple expressions. Could you repeat that, please? Could you speak a little more slowly? Sorry, I didn't catch that. Could you explain that again? What does that mean? These are not signs of weak English. They are signs of effective communication. The end of the day. When James finally returned home, he sat down and thought about his day. He remembered the coffee shop. He remembered the bus. He remembered his colleague. He remembered the restaurant. He remembered the meeting. He had spoken English with several different people, and something had changed. He was still making mistakes. His pronunciation was not perfect. Sometimes he still had to search for a word, but he was no longer afraid of speaking. He finally understood that confidence does not come from knowing everything. Confidence comes from using what you already know. That night, James made another promise to himself. He would speak English every day, even if it was only for 10 minutes, even if he made mistakes, even if he sometimes felt uncomfortable. He would keep practicing because he knew that every conversation was making him better. Maybe you're in the same situation today. Maybe you understand English, but struggle to speak. Maybe you are afraid that people will judge your mistakes. Maybe you think your vocabulary is too small. But remember James, he didn't become confident because his English suddenly became perfect. He became confident because he stopped waiting for perfection. He started using English, and you can do the same. Start with simple conversations. Say, "Hi, how are you?" Ask, "How was your day?" Talk about your work. Talk about your hobbies. Ask someone about their plans. Listen carefully. Respond naturally. And if you make a mistake, continue. Don't stop. Don't apologize for every little mistake. Don't translate every sentence in your head. Just communicate. Because fluency is not built in one day. It is built through hundreds of small conversations. One sentence today. Another sentence tomorrow. One conversation this week. Another conversation next week. Slowly, your brain begins to recognize patterns. Your vocabulary becomes easier to access. Your pronunciation improves. Your confidence grows. And eventually, speaking English starts to feel natural. Final message. So, the next time someone speaks English to you, remember this story. You don't need to find the perfect words. You don't need perfect grammar. You don't need a perfect accent. You simply need to start. Smile. Say hello. Ask a question. Listen to the answer. Respond, and keep the conversation going. If you make a mistake, learn from it. If you forget a word, find another way to express yourself. If you don't understand, ask the person to repeat it. Never let the fear of making mistakes stop you from communicating. Because every confident English speaker was once a beginner, every fluent speaker once struggled to find the right words, and every successful learner once made mistakes. The difference is that they kept going. So keep listening, keep repeating, keep practicing, keep speaking, and most importantly, believe that you can improve. Your English does not have to be perfect today. It only has to be better than yesterday. Speak a little more today. Speak with a little more confidence tomorrow. And one day, you will realize that the conversation you were once afraid to have has become something you can enjoy. Start speaking, keep practicing, and let every conversation take you one step closer to fluency.